Hello there, I'm Chris. I'm an astrophotographer. Been using Canons for, well, I've been doing astrophotography using Canons for the last eight to 9 years. So today we're at Dunwich on the Suffolk coast. Behind us you can see the ruins of the old Dunwich Abbey. One of the real advantages of this location is being on the coast. We've got very little light pollution. We have a clear view down towards the core of the Milky Way, so it gives you some really strong nightscapes. I picked Dunwich Abbey because it gives you a nice foreground, it gives you a reference point for your images. A lot of people will tend to forget the rules of photography when they're actually doing nightscapes, but those rules still exist. You still need a foreground to tie an image, even if you have got a stunning Milky Way. So today I've brought with me my Canon 7D and also my Canon 70D. My Canon 7D is primarily my daytime photography camera. However, it does still, being a 7D, it works perfectly for night views. My Canon 70D I tend to use for my night sky stuff. It has a articulating screen that actually works really well for nighttime use, especially if you're connecting to a telescope or you're trying to do a night view, because you can rotate the screen and not have to rotate your neck constantly. My 7D is just a standard Canon 7D, I haven't modified it. My Canon 70D I have modified for astrophotography. So I've actually removed the internal filters, which I wouldn't recommend to everybody because it will void your warranty. For myself, I'm quite tech savvy, so I actually removed the filters myself. I managed to get instructions online. It took a good few hours and it is incredibly fiddly. However, there are companies in the UK that you can send your cameras off to where they are professionally modified, and what they will do is they will replace the filter that they remove with a clear filter, so it then maintains your focus, and once you've set up a custom white balance, you can still use your camera during the day. Fortunately with my Canon 7D, because I've done it myself, the focus has shifted, so you have to live view focus, you can't use the viewfinder, and I haven't got another filter in there, so the white balance and UV is off, so it unfortunately doesn't work as a daytime camera anymore. It is purely for astrophotography. So the reason we remove the filters from our cameras, hydrogen is in the red bandwidth, and the filters that the cameras use, because red is quite strong in nature, the filters they use block part of the red spectrum, which then balances your colour channel so you get a true colour daytime photograph. Unfortunately, the area they block is what's emitted from hydrogen, which is the most abundant gas in the universe, and that's the stuff that makes up the Milky Way. And the reason we're trying to get the photos is to bring out as much as possible, so this just helps. So before I ever venture outside to do any astrophotography, I need to plan where we're going to go and the purpose we're actually going to that location. If you're just doing deep sky images, so if you're just looking at a galaxy or a nebula, you just need a dark sky location. However, for doing Milky Way type wide field shots, you need a foreground object. The rules of photography still apply. You still need that foreground object or foreground panorama just to tie the photos in, even if you have got a stunning Milky Way. So the reason I've picked Dunwich today is because we have, as you can see behind us, we've got the Dunwich Abbey. So the Abbey ruins, from this location, the Milky Way would appear directly behind, which means we can run a panorama image, so we can get the full arc of the Milky Way with the foreground object in front and the Milky Way climbing over top of the ruins. And we would do that in a way of a panorama, so a multiple image stitch that we put together to get a sort of almost 180-degree field of view. So what I've brought with me today as well is my tracking mount. So on top of the tripod, it's a good solid sturdy tripod, there's a tracking mount. So what I will do is align this axis here with the pole star, so point it north, and once it's switched on, the mount actually tracks the night sky. So this means we can run longer exposures and not have to face the risk of having your stars start to trail and stretch. So it keeps you nice round stars, but unfortunately it will then mean you blur your foreground. So there's a few tricks we can do to get both foreground and the stars perfectly sharp. So what I would initially do to start with is I would take my base image for the foreground with the tracker switched off. So this way you get the nice sharp foreground without the camera moving. What I would then do from the same location, turn the tracker on, and then I would lengthen my exposures and start running for the night sky. So with the tracker, it means I can do 30-second plus exposures. I could even run to multiple minute exposures if I wanted to, depending on your conditions and the light pollution. I would initially load the photos into Lightroom or equivalent. Lightroom has the power where you can it will stitch images together. So what I do is I'll add them all in, you select them all, you can then go to your options and set it to just create a panorama. That will then overlay all the images, set them together, stretch them, and present you with a combined image. You can then crop that image and set that as you want. I would then do that same process again with the foreground images. And then you've got your two images I'll then load into Photoshop, have those as separate layers. You can then take one image, select your foreground. For your select, there is an option now to select your foreground in Photoshop. You can copy and paste that and then paste that into the other image and set that as your foreground. So one of the most important factors when planning your trip to get your astro images is actually watching the weather. There's a couple of apps you could use, a few websites where you can actually monitor the weather forecast. Ideally, I tend to check multiples, and I also look at radar data just to see how the cloud is moving. Because as you can see at the moment, we are very overcast, but the forecasts are showing that it should clear later this evening. So we're set up and waiting for the clear skies to come in. So when you're imaging the night sky, there's a few rules you have to follow. If you're using a fixed tripod, there's a rule they call the 500 rule. So this takes your focal length of your lens and divides that by 500. This will give you roughly the maximum time you can expose for before the stars start to trail. Just a word to note though is if you are using a crop sensor, you need to times that figure by 0.64. This then gives you it just takes into account the smaller crop sensor. So normally on a 40mm lens, I can normally get about 20 seconds on a crop sensor. If you're stitching it together as a panorama, you can push it a little bit longer because the stars are that much smaller because it's a bigger area of sky, but it's definitely a rule that you need to follow. If you're working with a tracker mount, there's no limit really to how long an exposure you can run. Ideally, you wouldn't want to run more than a couple of minutes. After that time, your sensor's going to start to get hot and it's going to introduce noise into your image. It's always a bit of a trade in this hobby. You want to have your ISOs high to get as much detail as possible. You want to run your exposures as long as possible, but what that does is it heats up the sensor, introduces noise. So it's always trying to find that perfect balance. So with the camera settings, I would highly recommend putting it into manual mode and go into your settings and turn off all of the advanced, so the noise reductions and any shake reductions settings. What these can do is actually it will pick up noise and it might actually start to remove some of the stars thinking it's noise. So with ISO, I would normally try to set, depending on your camera, so if you're running a newer mirrorless camera, the sensors are a lot better and you can push the ISOs quite high. My 7D, I would probably keep the ISOs fairly low, so sort of probably nothing over 3000-ish. With my 70D, it handles its noise a little bit better, even while it is technically lower spec camera in the range. But I would normally go up to ISO 6400, possibly a little bit higher. But one of the key factors for doing wide field astrophotography is your lens. So actually the quicker the lens, the better. So by quicker I mean the f ratio. So if you can get an f2.4 lens or faster, brilliant. This just means it's the more light it can capture, so the more data you're gathering in a shorter time, especially because you're limited by the exposure length with the stars. With this setup, there's multiple different types of images we can do. We're not just limited to the wide field, the panoramas, the Milky Way. With the tracking mount, it means we can put a longer focal length lens on, and then we can actually start to go deeper into the sky and start to look at like galaxies and nebulas and other deep sky objects that your eye just can't see. With the deep sky objects, you will need a tracker mount. So a small lightweight tracker mount like this will still allow me to sort of image at sort of 300 to 400 mil focal lengths. This works really well with my 150. It's an f2.8, means I can get some real long exposures going, quick lens, and start to pull some real nice data down. The process for deep sky astrophotography is slightly different from what you would do with a wide field image. So what I'm looking to do is run multiple exposures tracking the same spot of sky. So I would probably set this to 2 to 3 minute exposures. ISO probably around the 1600 mark, because I'm not trying to pull as much data from each image, because what we're actually going to do is run multiple 2 minute, 3 minute exposures. And what you then do afterwards is you can use some stacking software. And what it does, it takes all your images and stacks them together to produce one single image. The advantage of doing this is you're combining all that data you've captured. Because the stuff's so faint, one image just doesn't do it justice. You stack more images, it brings out the fainter stuff, and it helps reduce the noise. It means you can stretch your data, you can brighten it, you can bring up that exposure levels where you wouldn't be able to do it with a single exposure. Another option we can look at doing is probably the easiest way to get into doing some astrophotography, and that's star trails. All you need for this: fixed tripod, camera, set it to 30-second exposures, set it to continuous, and this make sure you have a foreground object. Ideally, you would want it to be pointing north, because stars all rotate around the North Star, so the pole star. So what you can do is, if you've got a foreground object with a pole star above and behind, you get a nice rotation of stars. So you get like a vortex effect almost of the stars. Doesn't have to be pointing north, you can do it the other way, but the effect isn't quite as striking, should I say. So when we're setting up, because we're out doing astrophotography today, we've started in daylight, so we were able to set up early, but this doesn't happen very often. Normally it's pitch black, cold, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. So one really important thing to remember is actually a red light. We always use red lights when we're doing astrophotography, because white light actually harms your night vision. So it takes, on average, about 20 to 30 minutes for your eyes to fully adapt to the dark. And then once your eyes are adapted, it means you can actually see really quite well, even if it's pitch black. What red light does is it stops that interference of the white light, so you can still use a torch, you can get set up, but you've not damaged your own night vision, so you can still move around comfortably, and you're not going to get told off by anyone who else is trying to do some photography work or astronomy work down there, because they tend to get a little bit upset if you start flashing white lights around. So one real difficult part of astrophotography is sometimes getting focus. Because you're out in the dark, your autofocus will not work. But one real handy trick is, once you're out and set up, is to pick a bright star, aim your camera at the bright star, and then use the zoom feature on your actual live view. So using your live view, set your lens to infinity. It won't be perfectly focused at that point, but if you then pick a star, what you can do is, as you adjust the focus, you'll actually see that star will increase and decrease in size. And what you need to do is just run through that range and then drop it so the star is as pinpoint as you can possibly get it. Depending on your camera, with the new mirrorless, it's really easy, because they're so sensitive in live view, you can pick up a lot of stars. Some of the older, so like with my 70D, it's not too bad, but the 450D I had before this would struggle. But there's always options, because this time of year you'll have Jupiter, Venus might be up, so you've got the two planets, and they will be the brightest objects in the sky. Also, if the moon's up, you can often do the same trick, but actually using the surface of the moon to get your focus. And then hopefully you can get it sharp, but it's definitely an area you need to spend time, get it practiced, because there's nothing worse than doing an entire night's imaging. You get home in the morning, you plug your memory card into your big screen, and suddenly you realise you're out of focus and your entire night's work is lost. So another really important piece of kit. It's probably one of the cheaper parts as well, to be fair, but is a remote shutter release, or more importantly, an intervalometer. What you can then do is, once you're set up, you don't have to touch your camera at all, because even the smallest touch could cause enough vibrations to make your stars trail. Stars really do give away quite a lot in this. So with a simple intervalometer, what you can do is to set how long you want to image for, how many shots you want to take, and then you can just press start, lay it down, and leave your camera alone, and it will just keep running, keep taking the images as you've told it to. Some cameras do have built-in intervalometers, however they can be a little bit more limiting, at least with an external one. You can just plug it in, set it up, and it's all done on the handset, so you not have to go into the camera settings every time. One of the most important parts, as we've said, is planning. There's some really handy tools to help us do that. One of the main ones I use is an app called Photo Pills. This basically is a full map, and it just allows you to drop a pin on a location. It then shows you where the sun will be rising and setting, what times, the moon rise, the moon set. But more importantly, for locations like this, it shows you where the Milky Way will sit, and it shows you the arch, so you can actually then plan where you need to be standing before you've even left the house. And actually, once you look at something, you might go, actually, that doesn't work for tonight, but that might actually work in 4 months' time, when the Milky Way, because the night sky is constantly moving, so actually where the Milky Way is at the moment will be completely different to it is once we get into spring. Another part we said about was planning for the weather. There's a couple of apps that I use. One's called Sat24. This is a satellite mapping service. These are all free, but it just means it gives you a couple-hour window beforehand, running up to current time, and you can see which direction, how the clouds are moving. So actually, when you look at the forecasts, you can then almost judge yourself, is it actually going to do what they're telling me it's going to do? Another real good one is an app called Clear Outside. This is a weather forecasting app, but it gives you not just whether it's going to be clear, but it shows you what percentage cloud cover, and whether it's low, medium, high level cloud cover, what the dew point will be, whether it's going to be misty, and it sort of plans sort of 7 days in advance. This means you can plan ahead slightly. Obviously the forecasts change constantly, but at least with it you can see actually, okay, there's going to be 20% cloud cover, but it's high level cloud and it looks like it's going to be patchy, so actually you might still go out and give it a try, or you might look and go, actually this is going to be really hazy, we'll call it quits for tonight and stay at home. So we've talked a little bit about accessories already, but once you really get into the hobby, and if you're doing more serious photography, there are filter options, especially if you've got a modified camera. You can buy clip-in filters, so a filter that sits between the lens and the sensor. So they just clip in, lens goes on, but what you can do is these filters will reduce the light hitting the sensor, but in ways we want it to. So it can restrict the light, so we can literally look at hydrogen and oxygen. These are the two most abundant gases in the universe, so these are the areas that all the nebulosity in the Milky Way is made up of. So actually what it can do is really enhance your image, gives you a lot more contrast, and it takes out all the light pollution, all the background noise that you don't want. Just works really well for the deeper sky objects. So hopefully you've all discovered and learned something from what we've done this evening. But just to recap, top sort of 3 tips for this. One is your planning. Make sure you know where you need to be, make sure the weather's good, and make sure you can actually see the object you want to be imaging for that night. 2, as I said, tripod. A good, solid, sturdy tripod with a ball head or equivalent is a must. And once you've actually got all that in your setup, the 3rd tip is the 500 rule. And this is really crucial when you're trying to capture night skies. Stars are a real telltale, and if they're not pinpoint, they do jump out. So take the focal length of your lens, divide it by 500, and then times it by 0.6 if you're on a crop sensor, and that will give you a rough estimate of the exposure length you can do. So we're at the end of the evening. It's been a really productive night. We've got some, well, it looks like we've got some really good shots. It's always hard to tell because it's dark, your live view is quite bright. It always makes images look a lot better than potentially they can be when you put them on a big screen. But it's been a good night. We're now about to pack away and head home, and then the fun starts, and when we actually can get the images downloaded and get them into Photoshop, and we can actually have a look to see what we've accomplished this evening. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your time. Hopefully you've all taken something away from this and you've learned a little something. So get out there, get your photos, and then tag myself and Wex in on any Instagram or tweets that you send out. But thank you for your time this evening, and enjoy your dark skies.